My mother said I wasn't welcome at Christmas. Then a knock at the door left everyone speechless. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible by the very people who were supposed to love you the most? Imagine spending your entire life trying to earn your family's approval, only to discover that, on Christmas Eve of all nights, they've decided you're no longer welcome at your own childhood home. Now imagine that just when you think you've lost everything, someone you've never expected walks into your life and changes it forever. Stay with me, because Chloe's story starts with heartbreak, but where it ends is something no one in her family could have imagined. Christmas has always been described as the season of love, forgiveness, and family. It's the time of year when homes glow with warm lights, old arguments are forgotten, and people travel hundreds of miles just to sit around one table with the people they care about most. At least, that's what everyone likes to believe. For Chloe, Christmas had become the exact opposite. Outside her apartment window, Boston looked like something from a holiday postcard. Thick snowflakes drifted through the air while icy winds swept across the streets, coating everything in white. Cars moved slowly through the storm, and every few minutes she could hear children laughing somewhere below as they pulled sleds through the fresh snow. Inside her tiny apartment, however, the silence felt almost unbearable. The only light came from a small artificial Christmas tree sitting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't much taller than a coffee maker, and the cheap plastic branches struggled to hold a handful of tiny ornaments she had collected over the years. A single string of warm white lights blinked softly, filling the room with a gentle glow that somehow made the loneliness even more obvious. Chloe sat curled up on her couch, wrapped in an old gray blanket, staring at her phone. She had already read the message 10 times, maybe 11, maybe more. She knew every word by heart, but somehow she couldn't stop looking at it. Honey, it would be better if you didn't come home for Christmas this year. Caleb and Emily are hosting everyone, and things are a little complicated. We need to give them some space. We'll celebrate together another time. Another time. Those 2 words hurt almost as much as the rest of the message, because Chloe knew there would never be another time. Her mother, Patricia, had always mastered the art of saying cruel things in the gentlest possible way. She never yelled. She never insulted people directly. Instead, she wrapped rejection inside polite words until it sounded almost reasonable. Complicated. Some space. We'll celebrate another time. Anyone else reading that message might think it sounded thoughtful. Chloe knew exactly what it meant. Don't come. You don't belong here anymore. She slowly locked her phone and placed it on the coffee table before leaning back against the couch. She tried to tell herself she shouldn't be surprised. This hadn't started yesterday. It hadn't even started this year. It had been happening for almost 3 years. Growing up, everyone assumed Chloe would become a lawyer. There had never been any discussion about it. The Brooks and Whitmore law firm had belonged to the family for decades. Her grandfather had built it from nothing, and her father spent his entire life expanding it into one of the most respected firms in New England. Caleb had followed the plan perfectly. Top grades, Harvard Law, perfect internships, perfect soups, perfect speeches. To Patricia, Caleb represented everything a successful child should be. Chloe, on the other hand, had always been different. Even as a little girl, she filled notebooks with sketches instead of legal notes. While Caleb memorized famous court cases, Chloe spent hours teaching herself graphic design on an old laptop she had bought with money from part-time jobs. She loved creating things: logos, brand identities, illustrations, packaging. Every new project felt like solving a puzzle. She wasn't interested in winning arguments inside a courtroom. She wanted to build something that people could actually see. Something beautiful. Something meaningful. When college ended, everyone expected her to walk straight into the family office. Her desk was already waiting. Her father had even ordered a custom nameplate, but Chloe never showed up. Instead, she rented a tiny office above a coffee shop in downtown Boston and opened a graphic design studio with exactly one client: herself. Everyone told her she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Patricia called it childish. Caleb called it embarrassing. Even distant relatives whispered that Chloe was throwing away generations of family success just to play with colors and fonts. At first, she tried explaining herself. She told them she wasn't rejecting the family. She simply wanted to build something that belonged to her, something she earned on her own. No one listened. Within months, invitations became less frequent. Family dinners suddenly happened without telling her. Vacation photos appeared online after everyone had already returned home. Birthdays were quietly celebrated while Chloe found out weeks later through social media. Every holiday became another reminder that she was slowly disappearing from her own family. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was how normal everyone acted, as if excluding her required no explanation at all, as if she had chosen this. She glanced around her apartment. The furniture didn't match. The kitchen was so small she could touch both counters without taking a step. Her desk was covered with unfinished client work. There were coffee cups everywhere. The rent was expensive. Some months she wondered whether she'd even make enough to pay it. But every dollar inside that apartment belonged to her. Every client had chosen her. Every late night, every rejection, every success, she had earned all of it herself. Despite everything, she had never once called her family asking for money. She refused to give them the satisfaction. Her business wasn't huge. It certainly wasn't famous, but it was growing. Slowly, steadily, and that gave her hope. Her phone buzzed again. For one impossible second her heart jumped. Maybe her mother had changed her mind. Maybe someone finally realized Christmas wasn't Christmas without every member of the family. She reached for the phone. The notification wasn't from Patricia. It was an email from a client wishing her happy holidays. She smiled politely before setting the phone back down. Reality settled over her once again. Outside, snow continued falling. Across the street, she watched a family unload wrapped presents from the back of an SUV. The father carried a giant turkey into the house, while two little girls ran behind him wearing matching red scarves. The front door opened. Warm yellow light spilled onto the snow. Someone inside laughed. The door closed. Chloe looked away. She hadn't cried when she received Patricia's message. She hadn't cried when she decorated her tiny tree alone. She hadn't cried while wrapping presents for her nieces. But now, sitting in complete silence while watching strangers celebrate together, she felt tears slowly filling her eyes. She wiped them away before they could fall. No, she whispered to herself. I'm not doing this. She stood up and walked into the kitchen. On the counter sat two carefully wrapped gift boxes tied with silver ribbon. One was for 6-year-old Lily. The other was for 4-year-old Ava. She had spent weeks choosing them, not because anyone expected her to, but because those little girls had never done anything to deserve becoming part of the adults' bitterness. Whether her family wanted her around or not, Chloe still loved her nieces. She gently ran her fingers across the ribbons and smiled. I hope you girls like them. The apartment fell silent once more. The little Christmas tree blinked softly in the corner. Outside, church bells began ringing across the snowy city, announcing Christmas Eve. Most people heard celebration. Chloe heard a reminder. Somewhere just 2 hours away in Vermont, the people who shared her last name were gathering around a table, laughing together as though she had never existed. And for the first time in her life, she began wondering if maybe they truly believed she didn't. Chloe didn't sleep much that night. She spent hours lying awake on the couch, listening to the wind rattle the windows while the little Christmas tree blinked in the corner like a tiny lighthouse refusing to give up. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the dining room in Vermont, the long polished table, the crystal glasses, the smell of roasted turkey, Caleb making everyone laugh, Patricia smiling proudly beside him. In every version of the scene there was one empty chair, her chair, and no one seemed to notice it was empty. By late morning on Christmas Day, the silence inside the apartment had become unbearable. She made coffee she barely touched. She turned on a holiday movie and muted it after 10 minutes. She tried answering emails, but the words on the screen blurred together. Finally, her eyes landed on the two wrapped gifts still sitting on the counter. Lily and Ava, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, didn't understand family politics. They didn't understand disappointment, inheritance, expectations, or pride. They only knew that Aunt Chloe always remembered them. She picked up the gifts and held them against her chest for a moment. "I'm not going there to ask for anything," she said quietly to herself. "I'm just dropping these off. That's all." Once the decision was made, she moved quickly, almost afraid she might lose the courage to follow through. She pulled on her winter coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and carried the gifts downstairs to her car. The drive from Boston to Vermont normally took about 2 hours. With the snowstorm, it took much longer. The highway stretched ahead in a blur of white. Snow swirled across the windshield, while the heater hummed softly inside the car. Christmas songs played quietly on the radio, but Chloe barely heard them. Her thoughts kept drifting backward through the years. She remembered Christmas mornings, when she and Caleb would race down the stairs before sunrise. She remembered her father lifting her onto his shoulders so she could place the star on the tree. She remembered Patricia baking cinnamon rolls while pretending to be annoyed that everyone kept stealing them before breakfast. For a long time, she had believed those memories meant something permanent. Now she wondered whether she had simply imagined the closeness she thought they once shared. The farther she drove, the more nervous she became. Several times she considered turning around. What was she doing? They had asked her not to come. Maybe leaving the gifts by mail would have been easier. But then she pictured Lily asking why Aunt Chloe hadn't remembered Christmas this year, and she kept driving. As Vermont's rolling hills appeared through the snowfall, the landscape became almost impossibly beautiful. Pine trees stood heavy with snow, and smoke rose from distant chimneys into the pale winter sky. Eventually, she turned onto the long private road that led to the family estate. Her chest tightened. The house looked exactly as she remembered it, a grand white colonial home with tall windows glowing gold against the snow. Evergreen garlands wrapped around the porch railings, and thousands of tiny lights shimmered across the roofline. It looked like the kind of place people photographed for holiday magazines. For a moment, Chloe simply sat in the car, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. Inside that house were decades of memories. Inside that house were also the people who had decided she no longer belonged there. She took a deep breath, picked up the gift boxes, and stepped into the snow. The cold air hit her face immediately. Her boots crunched across the driveway as she walked toward the porch. Through the windows she could see movement inside, relatives talking, children running past, someone carrying dishes into the dining room. Her family was celebrating Christmas. Without her. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she swallowed them back. Just leave the gifts and go, she told herself. No drama, no confrontation. Just leave them and go. She climbed the porch steps and carefully placed the boxes beside the front door. One box had Lily's name written in silver ink. The other said Ava. Chloe straightened, took one last look at the house, and turned to leave. The door opened behind her. She froze. Patricia stood in the doorway wearing a dark green dress and a pearl necklace. Warm light spilled around her onto the snowy porch. For a split second, surprise crossed her face. Then her expression hardened. "Chloe," she said, "what are you doing here?" The warmth from the house contrasted sharply with the cold in her mother's voice. Chloe forced herself to remain calm. "I came to drop off the girls' Christmas gifts. I was just leaving." Patricia glanced down at the boxes. "I thought I made things clear in my message." "You did," Chloe replied softly. "That's why I'm leaving." Before Patricia could answer, another figure appeared behind her. Caleb stepped onto the porch holding a dinner plate loaded with food. He looked irritated more than surprised. "Seriously?" he said. "You're doing this on Christmas?" "I'm not doing anything," Chloe said. "I brought gifts for the girls." Caleb sighed as though she were causing a public embarrassment. "Then leave the gifts and go. We don't need a scene." The words landed like a slap. A scene. As if her mere presence was something disruptive. as if standing outside her own childhood home carrying presents for her nieces was unreasonable. Chloe looked from Caleb to Patricia. Neither of them invited her inside, neither asked whether she had driven safely through the storm. Neither offered coffee, water, or even a few minutes out of the cold. They simply stood there waiting for her to disappear. Something inside her broke a little. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet crack deep in her heart. She nodded once. "You're right. I shouldn't have come." She bent to adjust the gift boxes, partly to hide the tears threatening to return. When she stood again, her voice was steady, but only because she was forcing every emotion down. "Merry Christmas," she said. Patricia looked uncomfortable for the first time, but before she could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the snow echoed across the driveway. All three of them turned. A tall man in a black wool coat was walking toward the house through the falling snow. He moved with the calm confidence of someone completely accustomed to being noticed. There were no delivery trucks nearby, no driver following behind him. He had simply appeared out of the storm. As he stepped beneath the porch light, Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him instantly. Everyone did. Arthur Brooks, the billionaire developer whose face appeared on magazine covers, business channels, and conference stages across the country. The man whose company was reshaping skylines from New York to Chicago. For a second no one spoke. Then Caleb nearly dropped the plate in his hands. "Mr. Brooks," he stammered. What are you doing here?" Caleb stood frozen on the porch, his dinner plate trembling so badly that the silverware rattled against the china. For a man who spent every day negotiating million-dollar contracts in polished conference rooms, he suddenly looked like a nervous law student who had forgotten every word of his presentation. Patricia blinked several times, convinced she had to be imagining what she was seeing. Arthur Brooks, standing on her front porch, on Christmas Day. Snowflakes landed on the shoulders of his tailored black coat, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. His posture was calm, his expression composed, and there was a quiet confidence about him that filled the entire space without him saying a single word. For months, Arthur Brooks had been the name everyone in the family talked about. Caleb's law firm had been trying desperately to land his company as a client. Every meeting, every networking event, every charity gala, every opportunity, Arthur Brooks had remained just out of reach. His company was expanding across the country, acquiring historic properties and launching billion-dollar architectural projects that dominated headlines. Whoever represented him legally would secure years of prestige and millions in fees. Caleb had practically built his entire year around that possibility. Patricia often bragged to friends that once Arthur Brooks signed with their firm, the Whitmore family would enter an entirely new league. Yet now the man himself had appeared without warning. Not at the law office. Not at a corporate dinner. Not at one of Caleb's carefully planned business events. But here, on the front porch, on Christmas afternoon, Caleb immediately forced a smile onto his face and hurried down one step. "Mr. Brooks, it's an incredible honor," he said, extending his free hand. "I'm Caleb Whitmore. We've corresponded through your legal department several times. I wasn't expecting." Arthur didn't even glance at the outstretched hand. Instead, he calmly walked past him. Caleb's smile froze. Arthur continued forward until he stopped directly in front of Chloe. The serious expression on his face melted into a warm, genuine smile. "There you are," he said. Chloe stared at him, completely speechless. "I've been hoping I'd find you." For several seconds, she couldn't process what she was hearing. "My," she finally whispered. Arthur nodded. "I called your Boston office this morning, but one of your assistants mentioned you might have driven to Vermont for Christmas. I figured it was worth the trip." The world seemed to stop turning. Patricia looked from Arthur to Chloe and back again, as though watching two strangers perform a scene that made absolutely no sense. "You know my daughter?" she asked, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. Arthur turned toward Patricia politely. "Know her?" He smiled. "Mrs. Whitmore. Your daughter is one of the most talented creative professionals I've ever worked with." Patricia blinked. I'm afraid. I don't understand. I'm not surprised, Arthur replied calmly. About a month ago, Chloe led the complete redesign of one of our international brands. My executive team hired her agency after reviewing dozens of proposals. Chloe felt her heartbeat quicken. The project. The confidential branding assignment. She had spent weeks working with a corporate representative who introduced himself simply as Daniel from Strategic Development. She had assumed he worked for some large holding company. Never once had anyone mentioned Arthur Brooks. Arthur continued speaking. My executives warned me that redesigning a brand recognized in over 30 countries would be risky. He smiled at Chloe. They were wrong. He looked back toward Patricia and Caleb. What Chloe delivered exceeded every expectation we had. Caleb's confident expression began slipping away. Arthur's voice remained steady. She didn't simply design a new visual identity. She transformed the way our entire organization presents itself to the world. Our investors loved it. Our partners loved it. Our customers loved it. And quite frankly, he chuckled softly, I loved it. Chloe could barely believe what she was hearing. She had worked countless late nights on that project. There had been revisions, video conferences, creative presentations, endless brainstorming sessions. But every conversation had gone through middle management. She never imagined the owner himself had been reviewing every step. Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his coat. I had intended to wait until after the holidays. He pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. But some opportunities are too important to postpone. He handed it to Chloe. She accepted it carefully. Inside was an elegant leather folder. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first page displayed the Brooks Global Developments logo across the top. Below it was her name, Chloe Whitmore. She scanned the first few lines. Then her eyes widened. Global Creative Director, Equity Partnership, Boston Innovation Center. She stopped breathing for a second. The salary alone was more money than she had ever imagined earning in a single year. Then she saw the partnership percentage. Her knees nearly gave out. Arthur smiled as he watched her read. I've learned something over the years, he said. The truly exceptional people rarely realize how exceptional they are. Chloe looked up at him. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet. Arthur folded his hands comfortably. I simply wanted you to know that every member of my executive board voted unanimously. We don't just want your agency. We want you. He paused before adding warmly. We've spent 6 weeks hoping you'd accept. A heavy silence settled over the porch. Caleb stared at the contract as though it might disappear if he blinked. His own law firm had spent half a year chasing Arthur Brooks. Hundreds of phone calls, formal proposals, private dinners, corporate presentations. Months of effort, and Arthur hadn't come here because of legal business. He had driven through a snowstorm for Chloe. Patricia's breathing had become noticeably uneven. Only minutes earlier she had been politely telling her daughter there wasn't enough room inside the house. Now one of the most influential businessmen in America was standing on her porch praising that same daughter as a creative genius. Nothing about this afternoon was unfolding the way she had imagined. Arthur casually glanced toward the front door. His eyes landed on the 2 Christmas presents resting quietly beside the entrance. Then he noticed something else, the expressions on Patricia's face, Caleb's stiff posture, Chloe's red eyes, the untouched gift boxes. The fact that she was still standing outside in the freezing cold, while everyone else remained inside the warm house. Arthur had spent 40 years building companies, negotiating billion-dollar deals, reading people, understanding rooms before anyone spoke. He didn't need anyone to explain what had happened here. The entire story revealed itself in seconds. He looked back at Chloe. His smile remained kind. But something in his eyes changed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, not directed at Chloe. Directed at the people standing behind her. Arthur looked at Chloe for a long moment before speaking again, his voice calm and sincere. Business can wait. The words surprised everyone. He gently closed the contract folder in Chloe's hands and smiled. I didn't drive all the way from New York just to hand you paperwork. A puzzled expression crossed Chloe's face. Arthur continued, "My wife has been asking about the brilliant designer who completely transformed our company. She's heard me talk about you for weeks. My children even know your name because I've mentioned your work so many times at dinner." He glanced toward the beautifully decorated house behind Chloe, then back at her. "I was hoping that after we discuss the contract, you'd do my family the honor of joining us for Christmas dinner." For a second, Chloe wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. Arthur smiled warmly. "Our estate is only about 20 minutes from here. The table is already set. My wife makes enough food to feed an army every Christmas, and she'd be genuinely disappointed if I came home without inviting you." He chuckled softly. "I think she'd forgive me for forgetting the cranberry sauce before she'd forgive me for leaving you standing out here." No one said a word. Snow continued drifting quietly around them. The silence on the porch suddenly felt heavier than the storm itself. Patricia slowly looked at the multimillion-dollar contract in Chloe's hands. Then she looked at Arthur. Finally, her eyes settled on her daughter. Only minutes earlier, Chloe had been standing on this very porch holding 2 Christmas presents, hoping for nothing more than a smile and perhaps a simple, "Merry Christmas." Instead, she had been treated like an unwanted visitor. Now the most respected businessman in the region was inviting her to spend Christmas with his own family. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration. Patricia swallowed hard. "Chloe?" she began quietly. Her daughter turned toward her. For the first time all afternoon, Patricia seemed unable to find the right words. Maybe we've misunderstood things." Caleb stepped forward quickly, forcing an awkward smile. "Yeah, Chloe," he laughed nervously. "I think this whole thing got blown out of proportion." He looked toward Arthur before continuing. "Why don't you just come inside? Everyone would love to see you." The invitation sounded hollow. A few minutes ago he had been telling her not to make a scene. Now he suddenly wanted her at the family table. Chloe looked at her brother carefully. She knew him too well. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't love. This was panic. He wasn't worried about losing his sister. He was worried about losing Arthur Brooks. Patricia reached for Chloe's arm, but hesitated before touching her. "We saved you a place," she said weakly. It was a lie. They all knew it. There had never been a place waiting for her. Arthur remained silent. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched Chloe with the quiet patience of someone who understood that some decisions couldn't be rushed. For years, Chloe had dreamed about hearing these words. "Come inside. Stay for dinner. You're part of this family." She had imagined countless versions of this moment, but somehow, now that it had finally arrived, it didn't feel the way she thought it would. She looked through the open front door. Inside, relatives had gathered near the dining room, pretending not to watch. Children whispered to each other. An aunt quickly looked away when their eyes met. Everything inside that house suddenly felt strangely unfamiliar. It had once been home. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to a life she no longer lived. She looked down at the gift boxes. Lily and Ava deserved their presents. They deserved a wonderful Christmas. Whatever problems existed between the adults weren't their fault. Chloe picked up both gifts and handed them to Patricia. "These are for the girls." Patricia accepted them silently. "Please tell them I love them." "I will," Patricia whispered. For another moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile. It wasn't angry. It was peaceful. "I spent a long time believing that if I worked hard enough, I'd finally earn a seat at this table." She glanced toward the dining room. "I've finally realized something. You shouldn't have to earn a place in your own family." The words hung in the cold winter air. Even Caleb lowered his eyes. Arthur didn't say anything. He simply opened the passenger door of his car. Not because Chloe needed rescuing, but because he respected her enough to let her choose her own path. Chloe looked once more at the house where she had grown up. She remembered birthday parties in the living room. She remembered decorating enormous Christmas trees with her father. She remembered believing that family meant forever. Sometimes people changed. Sometimes they revealed who they had always been. And sometimes the hardest thing wasn't losing a home. It was accepting that it had stopped being home long before you walked away. She turned toward Arthur. "I'd be honored to join your family." His face lit up. "The honor is ours." As they walked through the falling snow toward his car, Chloe didn't look back. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward something better. Behind them, Patricia remained standing on the porch with the two small Christmas gifts pressed against her chest. The cold no longer seemed to bother her. Regret had a way of making people forget the weather. Caleb watched Arthur's car disappear down the long driveway until the taillights vanished behind the snow-covered trees. Only then did he realize what had really happened. For 6 months, he had chased the most valuable client of his career. He had attended every networking event, sent carefully crafted proposals, scheduled meeting after meeting. In the end, he hadn't lost Arthur Brooks to another law firm. He had lost him because he failed something much more important than business. He failed to recognize the value of the person standing right beside him. 20 minutes later, Chloe stepped into a home she'd never seen before. The front door opened before Arthur could even reach for the handle. A cheerful woman wrapped in a red sweater hurried outside with 2 excited children following behind her. "There she is," Arthur's wife said with the biggest smile. "So you're the Chloe we've been hearing about." Before Chloe could even respond, Arthur's youngest daughter hugged her around the waist. "We made extra cookies," the little girl announced proudly. "Dad said you might come." Everyone laughed. No one asked why she had arrived late. No one questioned whether she belonged there. No one made her feel like a guest. They simply welcomed her. Inside, the house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh bread. Someone handed her a cup of hot chocolate. Someone else pulled out a chair beside the fireplace. For the first time that entire Christmas, someone had actually saved her a seat. Later that evening, while everyone shared stories around the dinner table, Chloe quietly looked around the room. She realized something that changed her forever. Family isn't always the people who share your last name. Sometimes, family is the people who recognize your worth long before you recognize it yourself. And that's why the greatest Christmas gift Chloe received that year wasn't the extraordinary contract sitting safely inside Arthur's briefcase. It wasn't the promotion. It wasn't the partnership. It wasn't even the career she had always dreamed of. It was discovering that the people who truly value you will never make you stand outside in the cold, wondering if you're welcome. If this story touched your heart, remember this: never let someone else's inability to appreciate your worth convince you that you have none. The right people won't just admire your talents, they'll make room for you at their table. And sometimes, the family that changes your life isn't the one you're born into, but the one that chooses you.